Chance Engine is a powerful MIDI effect that allows you to add unique, dynamic, yet controlled variation to incoming MIDI or generate complex musical patterns all on its own. Chance Engine is a MIDI effect and therefore must be placed prior to instruments. It can be used with any virtual instrument, including audio unit or VST plugins, not just the ones shown in this video. To install Chance Engine, navigate to the folder where it was downloaded. Double-click the zip file and drag the entire folder, or simply the subfolder entitled Chance Engine, into Live's user library. I have created a folder called Manifest Audio, which is where I will drag it, and putting it in the user library ensures that it will be ingested into Live's search and category functions. Now that the folder has been copied into my user library, I can open the project and I'll navigate into the presets inside the MIDI effects folder. Chance Engine is a MIDI effect, so that's where all of the presets appear. And within the subfolder labeled Max MIDI Effect, I can grab the default instance of Chance Engine. Now I'm going to hit the key 1 on my keyboard to add it to my generative collection for easy reference in the future. Now I think I will go ahead and put Chance Engine on this simple melody I have on this wavetable. Let's take a look at the melody. Fairly repetitive. There's a few little changes at the end of the bar on the second and fourth time around. And so let's take a listen. It's fine, but a little bit repetitive. So I'll go back to my device view, and here we have the Chance Engine. Now, right away, I want to induce a bit of velocity variance. So already, we're getting a lot of nice changes happening there, and I can constrain the minimum and maximum values within which velocity will be randomized. Now I think I want to also randomize the octave. Now I can similarly constrain the minimum and maximum octave ranges within which note octaves will be randomized. I can also transpose the native octave There are other ways to transpose notes, which we'll get to soon, but it's useful sometimes to just be able to do this one octave at a time. Now I also want to randomize the hold amount, which, if I bring it all the way to the maximum, is essentially like holding down a sustain pedal. Because this is a monophonic synth patch with some glide, we're getting those nice, lovely glide sounds. Now it's still a little bit too busy to my ear, so I think I will reduce the chance that notes will play. Now, if I turn the play amount to 0, I essentially gate out any incoming MIDI. So this works as a MIDI through gate. Now these are all available for automation and real-time performative control via MIDI mapping. So just by way of contrast, I'll toggle this off for a moment. A bit robotic, a bit static in comparison. Now it's really coming to life, isn't it? Now you might have noticed a pitch randomization amount, which I can also increase. But it starts to sound a little bit less musical and just totally random. And that is because I have not selected an appropriate scale. So the default is chromatic, meaning notes are not quantized or conformed to any musical output values, but I know this is in a minor scale. So I'll just select Aeolian minor, and I can leave it in the key of C. And at 100%, every note will be randomized. Now there are 3 randomization modes. Chance is purely random. The second option, called drunk, uses a so-called random walk style, where note pitches are more likely to be randomized to an adjacent or neighboring pitch value. The final mode, called fluid, is modeled on the interaction of quantum particles in a fluid state, and it is a mixture between the fully random and the drunken, and yields uniquely lyrical results where coherent contours are sort of abided to, rather than completely jumping around from totally unrelated note values. Now I can also constrain the range within which pitches will be randomized here. So that's a much narrower range, and we can go all the way up here and there, which is useful if you don't want to worry about the octave randomization. But I'll just set that back to the default by double-clicking. And I think that maybe I'll disable the octave randomization for a moment so you can hear what the global transposition does. So essentially I can transpose all the output, conforming of course to the selected scale and key. So I'm currently randomizing the pitch every single step that arrives. But if I increase this number, I can tell the chance engine to only choose a new pitch value every multiple of 16th notes. So 4 16th notes means it will only choose a new pitch every quarter note. Now, with the MIDI coming through, it's a little more difficult to ascertain the value of this. But as we switch to the alternative mode of chance engine, the value of this feature will become more apparent. So before I switch to the other mode, just a reminder, and so with the pitch randomization off, just using the velocity, octave, hold, and a reduction in the chance the notes will play, created a very dynamic structure related to the input and adhering in many ways to the contours of that input. And if we add just a little bit of pitch variance, can make it even more dynamic. but not always necessary. So I'm just going to stop this clip, and I will now switch Chance Engine to its other operation mode. By default, it's set to process incoming MIDI. So this MIDI input indicates that it's receiving MIDI and processing that. If I click this process toggle, we can switch into generate mode. Now, to really get a sense of what this is doing, I think maybe it would be useful to set these all back to their default. And now I'm just playing a 16th note pulse. So I can change the root pitch . So now it's just coming through at C3. And it's playing at 16th notes. This is called a bass rate. So I can select any musical interval as the bass rate. And it's got a multiplier here. So this means pulses will be generated every 1 16th note. If I set it to 2 16th notes, well, that's an 8th note, isn't it? And if I increase it further, we've got a nice dotted 8th pulse. So there's no MIDI coming in. This is purely generated. Okay, so I'll show now how I might use a couple extra features that I haven't gotten into yet. So right now, every single 16th note is being randomized. But I can say, hey, let's not randomize until every bar. So now every 16th notes, it's choosing a random pitch. Again, this is all completely generative. So all you have to do is multiply 16th notes to get a bar interval. So I can just type in 32 to switch this to randomizing every 2 bars. Now I can do all sorts of peculiar things here. For example, let's try randomizing it only every 6 16th notes. So that's a dotted quarter note that they're randomizing. And I will switch the play multiplier to 3 16th notes. So every 2 of these dotted 8th notes will play the same pitch because the pitch isn't being randomized until every 6 16th notes. So that's interesting. I'd like to point out another mode of operation here. So I'll set this to quarter notes. So now it's playing every quarter note. And now I can use this bottom gray drop down, which offers the same rate values as an offset. So I can say, play quarter notes, but don't start on the quarter note, offset by 1/8 note. So this is the multiplier of the offset. The offset is how far after the first downbeat the beginning of the pulses are staggered. And now that I have set this to quarter notes, I can set this to transpose the pitch only every 8th quarter notes because the bass rate value is now adopted as the randomization interval multiplier. Now I can also go back to ×1. So whatever this is, ×1 means every single MIDI note will be randomized by pitch. I think that I will set it back to 16th notes, at which point, because the interval is shorter than the offset becomes irrelevant. Now, this is all in the default musical interval mode. And I can switch to a time mode that inherits the nearest millisecond value of the selected base rate and multiplier for seamless transition. Now you can hear it's no longer in sync with the drums. And now as I toggle back into metrical mode, it adopts the nearest musical base rate to the last left millisecond value, which is currently 8th note dotted. So that's nice. Now there's one last mode I would like to show, which is that by default, Chance Engine, when in generate mode, is generating notes internally. In other words, this is the bass note that is being subjected to octave and pitch randomization. So if I turn the pitch off, there's the incoming pitch. But if I set it to receive, I can no longer change the incoming pitch. And now I've got this progression clip. And this is going to tell Chance Engine what bass note it should use to transpose. So we can see it following the contour of this melody, but we can adjust the rhythm how we wish. And of course, the octave is still randomizing. And I can still randomize the pitch, but it will be inheriting those MIDI notes as the bass contour from which randomizations are occurring. And of course, if it gets too busy, just minimize it. And I can bring the play chance down quite a bit to just create a very minimalist interpretation of these melodies that are happening. Now, I'd like to quickly look at using Chance Engine on drums. By now, you've probably gotten a little bit annoyed with the very static maraca pattern. So I will go and grab an instance of Chance Engine and place it directly on that maracas pad. And now I can simply induce a bit of velocity, randomization, and bring the play chance down a bit. And it's just the 16th note pattern that's now being made a lot more dynamic via velocity and play chance modification. Now I can also adjust the pitch a little bit there. To make it a little more evident, I think I will turn off the wavetable and go back here so we can really hear the original maracas with no variation at all. So I've got the pitch going a little bit. What happens if I turn up the octave? Now it's important that the simpler be in a mode where it can receive pitches. And now I've got the velocity changing and the play changing. The octave and pitch is maybe a little too much, but I've got some nice variation there. Now, I do not as yet have any pattern programmed on the hi-hat, so I will bring an instance of Chance Engine onto the hi-hats and put it into generate mode to see what sort of unique pattern I can create this way. And I will mute the maracas to really just focus on the Chance Engine. So first of all, I think it might be useful to give myself access to smaller intervals. So I'll set it to 30-second notes. And then multiply it by 2. 2 30-second notes is a 16th note, but now I can bring that down to 1 to get nice little trill sort of rolls going. Again, the velocity floor is too low, and I may have neglected to mention this, but this allows me to set a base velocity, the default velocity from which values are being randomized. So the default for that is 100, should be good in most cases. All right. So I think I can get some pretty interesting stuff randomizing the octave and the pitch a little bit. Now I can automate and modulate all these parameters. And this is the length of the notes that are going through. The note length multiplier. So we can get some pretty interesting experimental patterns like this. However, you may find it useful to either automate or modulate the default internal note pitch. Okay, so I've generated some percussion. Now I would like to look at some advanced modes using the play modes. And I think the easiest way to do this would be to go back to this wavetable. And what I want to do is actually set it back to the internal mode here. And I'm going to use this trigger clip. It's just a simple half bar C2. And it won't do anything by default as it waits to play at the beginning of the 4-bar section. Now this is the final advanced feature we have yet to explore. I'm just gonna make these a bit shorter by default. Okay, so we have 3 modes, and by default, it's gonna play in free mode, which means it's going to ignore that MIDI input. But if I set it to gate mode, that MIDI on-off, incoming MIDI on-off messages will act as a gate. So now we're only generating notes while that gate note is held coming in. Now there's an opposite mode called side. This is like a sidechain mode. And now it's only going to generate notes when it's receiving a note off message. And as soon as it receives the MIDI note on, it stops playing. Now this gets useful to do some tricky stuff. I, for example, have an operator over here. Now I'll put another Chance Engine over here and set it to the same minor scale. And I'll set it to generate as well. So I am going to reduce the play amount. Okay, now where this gets interesting is if I enable the MIDI routing and tell it to receive MIDI from the wavetable, pre-effects. This is crucial. I just want it to be receiving the note from this clip. I don't want it to receive the MIDI from the actual chance engine on that track. And now I'll set it to gate mode. However, one last step to get this to work is I need to set it to monitor in, so it's receiving that MIDI in trigger. So now, the operator is playing when that note's happening and the wavetable is playing when it's not. So we have this dynamic call and response going. I think I'll pitch the default octave of this up quite a bit and pan them left and right. So incredibly dynamic possibilities are available using the gate and side modes. Bonkers. Now you might be wondering, this is completely random, so how might I make actual use of it? And that is an excellent question. So there are two ways that this can be done. The first is to create a new audio track. And I will set it up to receive audio from wavetable. And I think I'm going to turn the operator off for now and set this back to free play mode. And if I arm this to record, I can see it's receiving from the wavetable, which I think I want to pan back down the middle. And as soon as I begin recording audio, so this is highly flexible, highly useful when you want to capture as audio and perform editing that only audio can provide. However, if I want to be able to have a little bit more control over what I capture, then in this case, I might want to record it as MIDI. So I'll stop recording that audio there, and I will insert a MIDI track. And I will set this MIDI track to receive from the wavetable. And this time I do want it to be post effects. I do want it to be capturing the MIDI output processed from Chance Engine. Now I can arm this to record, and this all comes through in real time, and maybe I'll make some adjustments to this. And so Live 11 has the chance notes will play, but it's not available for automation or performative interaction via MIDI mapping. So you can create very dynamic intensification of musical patterns by increasing the play chance and then diminishing it. And by the time I think I've got enough of that, I can simply stop recording that MIDI clip, which will occur at the end of the next 4 bars here. And so now I think That trigger clip wasn't really doing anything at this point. I will simply turn Chance Engine off, and because it was generating all the MIDI, now we hear nothing. So I can drag this captured MIDI over to the wavetable, and with Chance Engine off, we're just going to hear the MIDI that was recorded. Now I can select segments that I like and of course edit the MIDI as desired. I can now of course activate or deactivate, move notes up or down, left or right, or of course make them longer as needed or shorter. Incredibly flexible ability to capture any output generated performatively from Chance Engine. So as you can hopefully see by now, Chance Engine is a deceptively powerful generative MIDI tool that can create all kinds of dynamic and interrelated musical patterns. Your imagination is the limit. There are endless possibilities when you are working with Chance Engine.